So, you've said to me, sorry, Cliff, not enough evidence to support Christ. No problem. Now, you've got to answer the question, if you're going to be intellectually consistent and honest, what is the option that is supported by more evidence than Christ?
An atheist claims there's no God, but then admits to living by Christian values. Cliffe Knechtle challenges the contradiction, exposing a truth most people never see coming. This conversation gets real, and you won't want to miss a second.
I'm personally an atheist because that's where the evidence has led me.
Right.
But I have put a lot of effort into trying to figure out the truth. And I would personally say that I'm not resistant to God, but yet I still don't believe in him. And how could an all-loving God allow a case like that to exist?
I would argue that love demands free will. If it ain't free, it ain't love. It's manipulated, it's coerced, but it's not real love. I would argue to really love someone, you got to make a free decision.
I personally wasn't raised with any religion.
Yes.
But for some reason, whatever reason, all the evidence that I've come across through reading the Bible, going to church, talking to my Christian friends, listening to debates, something in my psyche has just told me that atheism is more convincing than theism. How is that my fault that the evidence was not convincing enough to me?
Okay, well, what do you mean when you say atheism is more convincing? How is atheism more convincing to you than Jesus Christ?
There's a lot of things that I could say.
We'll just start at the top, the best reasons.
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is the problem of animal suffering is really difficult to contend with in religion.
Yes.
I know for the problem of evil, a lot of Christians say free will, which I understand that argument, but it becomes more difficult when you talk about animal suffering in the wild that doesn't have any human influence, and why would a loving God allow the starvation, disease, predation on billions of animals every day? They're truly suffering.
Yes,
and
there
there's
is.
no promise of heaven for them because in the Christian view, animals don't have souls. So that just seems really unjust to me, and a loving God wouldn't create that type of system.
Okay, I respect your sensitive conscience. Who defines justice? Why are you so outraged that animals suffer innocently? If there is no God, what is? It's not good. It's not evil. You use the word evil. Who defines evil? If there is no God, evil is totally subjective, totally relative. It's a crapshoot.
In the atheistic worldview, the world that we see totally makes sense. I'm saying that in the evolution, I would expect to see the world that we're observing with the atheistic worldview, but in a Christian worldview, that's where the problem lies. I'm not saying that.
Don't you see the way you're contradicting yourself? What do you mean? In the atheistic worldview, it makes sense. When you're standing here saying the suffering of innocent animals is evil. Well, if there is no God, the suffering of animals is not evil, it just is. And for you to put a value judgment on it, that it's evil or bad, that's your own illusion. That's your own fantasy. The same way for me to say, if he smacks you in the face, that's evil. Well, that's not evil. He just smacked you in the face. What is.
A better way to phrase the question would be, do you think animal suffering is evil?
Yeah. God clearly says, don't cause any animal to suffer. So yes, inflicting pain on animals is not good.
No, but I'm talking about just in nature, without human involvement. Do you think a baby deer dying of a disease and suffering a slow death
is bad?
Okay, so how does a Christian God contend with that?
It's not God who's causing an animal to suffer. It's not God who's causing a person to suffer. That's because they're born into an unfair, messed up world. It's a consequence.
But God is, in the Christian view, is always just and correct, and
God
why
is
should-
just. Yes.
If animals don't have souls, they didn't. They don't have sin,
Yeah.
which is typically like the Christian reason why humans suffer is because we're sinful. And
No.
we have free will.
No.
And we can choose our own.
No, ma'am. Just
But
read the book
why
of Job. Job suffers. His
Yeah, but-
buddies come to him and say, watertight case. We know why you're suffering, Job, because you sinned. Totally wrong. And the book of Job makes that crystal clear. When they told Job, hey, Job, we know why you're suffering. It's because you're a sinner. And if you just were to repent of your sin, you'd stop suffering. God was angry with them. They were lying. They were inaccurate. See, ma'am, you and I are born, and animals are born into an unfair, messed up world. And that's why you reel back with indignation, and that's good. You should. And that's why Jesus, when he walked on earth, healed the sick, raised the dead, fed the hungry, because he knew this ain't right. This is not good. This is lousy. You're absolutely correct, ma'am. But you see, if you're an atheist, you're wiping out the basis for understanding this sucks. This is horrible. But what you're saying is, all of reality is a result of the evolutionary cycle. So this animal, the reason this animal suffers is because of evolution. That's despair if you think about it. I respect you a lot for the way you have just expressed moral outrage over innocent animal suffering. Bravo. But the whole basis of your outrage is a theistic worldview, which says there is a God who created things a certain way. Things got royally messed up. And now the question is, what's the solution to the mess? This guy says to me, Cliff, why don't you believe in Jesus? And I say, because there's not enough evidence. And he says, okay, Cliff, then what are you living for? And I say, well, nothing. I'm not living for anything. I'm lying.
Okay.
Look
So,
at the way I'm
what do I
dressed.
value?
Yeah.
I value
Human value,
truth,
human meaning and purpose,
education.
ethics.
Yeah.
Okay, but what are you living for? And then what's the evidence that whatever it is you are living for is true?
I value like education and happiness.
And happiness?
I personally think you find meaning from your life by finding your own happiness. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I can get
Sure it
more
does.
specific, but
That makes a ton of sense. Okay, now, you basically communicated my faith is in myself ultimately. I define happiness and the best way to happiness. I define education as a worthy priority in my life. Okay, so what is the evidence that you are more reliable than Christ? Obviously, you've chosen to trust yourself.
yeah. I'd say I just don't. Yeah, I don't really know what you want me to say.
I just
Like
want
the
you to say what you believe in and why you're living for whatever it is you're living for. That's all.
Why do I live for happiness?
Why have you decided to trust yourself as being ultimately reliable instead of trusting Christ? Christ doesn't have enough evidence, so what's the evidence that supports you being so reliable that to put your faith in yourself is wiser, a better decision than putting your faith in Christ?
I don't think I have that much like faith in the religious sense in myself. I try to do what I think is best every day, and sometimes that ends up being wrong. Sometimes that ends up being right. But I don't have to. I'm not saying that what I believe in and how I live my life is correct. I'm just doing the best that I can. I'm not trying to convince anybody else here of atheism, but you're trying to convince people here of Christianity. So I don't think I have to contend with the same things that you do.
Oh, come on. Come on now, you can see through that. Ma'am, you're doing something far more significant with your faith than standing out here and talking. You're living your life a certain way. You're treating people a certain way. You're handling money a certain way. You're handling education a certain way. You know very well that the way you live your life shows what you really believe about reality. You know, I'm not sure he's really standing here, okay? I'm not sure. I'm agnostic. I don't know. Right about now, I got to make a decision. is the preponderance of evidence that pointing to his face starting right there, or can I really believe that his face isn't there, it's just an illusion I'm having? I'm agnostic, I don't know. Well, right about now I'm going to have to make a decision. I have no choice. Ma'am, you live your life. You have to make choices. Is he valuable or is he trash?
I think human life is valuable.
Why? Why is human life valuable?
I'd say human life is valuable just because we can create meaningful connections and have relationships and have an overall positive experience in life, even if that means in the atheistic worldview that there's nothing in the afterlife. I think even if there's no afterlife, life can still be meaningful.
Okay, before we go on, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this discussion. This is why I do what I do. And you obviously respect me enough to think very clearly and articulate yourself, and I cannot thank you enough. You've made my day, okay? I'm serious. Oh, you have. You've totally made my day. Okay, but ma'am, remember something. If what you say is true, then if I tell you the meaning of my life is to smack him in the face, you cannot look at me and say, oh no, you're wrong, Cliff. You can just say, well, Cliff, from my perspective, that's wrong. But from your perspective, obviously, it's right to smack him in the face. Why? Because as an atheist, you understand it's all relative. Which means your definition of good and evil is, don't smack him in the face, but it is relative. So if my definition is, oh, you can smack him in the face, Cliff, you're not wrong. You just make your own relative decision. And you see, you can't live that out. Ma'am, what was the bloodiest century of human history so far?
I'm not sure.
The 20th century. By far the bloodiest history, bloodiest part of human history. Mao Zedong, 37 million slaughtered. Joseph Stalin, 42 million slaughtered. Adolf Hitler, 20 million slaughtered. Pol Pot, 2 million slaughtered. There is no century in human history that is as bloody as the 20th century.
Don't we have more Christians than ever in the 20th century, like population-wise?
I can promise you, ma'am, that's where you got to be real honest with the Bible. Jesus points out that he has a great deal of good in him because he's created in the image of God, and he's also a dirty, rotten sinner, and so am I. Good and evil are within this guy's heart, and they're within my heart. And to be honest with you, I can do some pretty perverted things if there's nobody around to hold me accountable, and if you tick me off enough. I'm embarrassed to say that. I'm not proud of that fact, but it's true. All right? So, the fact that there are a bunch of, quote, Christians, unquote, doesn't mean much. Are they really genuinely following Christ? Not in Dachau and Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Not in the slaughter of people in Russia, in the Soviet Union. Not in Pol Pot's Cambodia. No, ma'am.
Yep. If Christianity is true, I don't want to go to hell. So what would you say to me, who I don't think I'm a resistant non-believer?
Well, then I would appeal to Blaise Pascal, the brilliant French thinker, the wager. If you're right that there is no God, I don't lose anything. If I'm right that God is real and that Jesus Christ is the way to heaven, you lose everything. Well, similarly, if you're going to tell me that everything's relative, but you're really outraged over the pain that animals experience, you're an intellectual hypocrite because you're contradicting what you believe. What Hitler did is not absolutely wrong, it's relatively wrong.
Yeah,
I think that Hitler truly believed that what he was teaching was correct, even though it was egregiously, horribly, horrifically wrong. I think in his sick brain, he thought that he was doing what was best.
And ma'am, my point is very simply, we agree about Hitler, but you have no basis for saying that what Hitler did was wrong, because you're a moral relativist.
Yeah.
And if you're a moral relativist, I'm an arrogant twit if I look at Hitler and say, oh, that was evil. I'm an arrogant twit if I look at Joseph Stalin and say, oh, that was evil. What I should say is, from my cultural perspective, from my biased position, what you guys did was wrong. But that's just my opinion, because it's all relative. And I can't live that way. Just look at the Nuremberg trials. The Nazi officers had some brilliant lawyers. And the lawyers said, whoa, 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 time out. Who do you Americans think you are, and Europeans, judging Nazis? Don't you realize the Nazi officers were just doing what their superiors told them to do? and the Nuremberg trial shut down. Until Robert Jackson, the American consul, stood up and said, wait a second, there is a law above the law of culture. And according to this law, it makes judgments on people gassing Jews. It's absolutely wrong. What do you think Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in the letter to the Birmingham jail? He wrote, I understand. The great state of Alabama has said segregation is good. But guess what, guys? There is a law above the law of the great state of Alabama, and according to this law, segregation is evil. Well, what was King referring to? Obviously, he was referring to the law of God and saying, guess what? If a racist state of Alabama supports segregation, that doesn't make it right. I don't care how much of the culture accepts it. But if there is no God, ma'am, there is nobody above the great state of Alabama. And it's all relative. But Dr. Martin Luther King understood rubbish. There is a God, an intelligent mind, above the laws of the great state of Alabama, and according to God's law, racism is evil. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I want to take a step back, and if anybody else wants to talk.
Thank you so much for talking with me. I appreciate it immensely. Thank you so much.
If that gave you something to think about, make sure to hit subscribe for more eye-opening conversations like this one. And don't forget to check out the next video. There's more where that came from.